Tonight, Parliament braces itself for a late sitting into the very early hours of the morning as Rishi Sunak tries to drive through his Rwanda bill. The Prime Minister holds a press conference to declare enough is enough and that tonight is the night, but he admits that flights won't take off this spring. He does say, though, there'll be a regular rhythm of multiple flights once they start in 8 to 10 weeks' time. Well, I've been speaking to Kruger, one of the Conservative MPs who has previously voted against the Rwanda bill, because he said it would be slow and small scale. The court's been told Donald Trump tried to silence the porn star Stormy Daniels as one of the most high-profile criminal cases in US history gets underway. We'll tell you what's happened so far. We've been speaking to Keir Starmer about what some say is his true passion, football, and how he wants to widen access to sport in schools. And as we gear up for an extremely late night sitting of Parliament, we'll be looking at how MPs and Lords dealt with unsociable sittings in years gone by. All that and more with Daisy Cooper and Tim Loughton, who will be with us for the next hour. And yes, we have offered them all of the coffee they want. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Tonight, we think, is going to be the night when finally Rishi Sunak gets his Rwanda legislation through Parliament. Now, I know it feels a bit like we've been marched up this hill before, and trust me, I do not want to play the role of the Grand Old Duke of York again. But all of the signs are that by the end of the day, or at least by the early hours of the morning, the Rwanda bill will be law. Well, voting started in the afternoon. It's going on until the evening as the Lords add amendments that are then thrown out by the Commons, ping-pong in the parliamentary jargon. But no matter how late it gets, the Prime Minister has vowed to push his plan through Parliament tonight, and we will, of course, bring you every twist and turn. But then, what happens next? Well, according to the Prime Minister, flights to Rwanda will start taking off in 10 to 12 weeks' time. Now, if you're sceptical about whether that will happen and you feel the Grand Old Duke of York has taken you up this hill before, I get it. But that is what the Prime Minister is saying. Apparently, commercial flights have already been organised and officials are on standby. Here's the thing, though. Even if that does happen and flights taking migrants to Rwanda start in July, that's not going to be the end of Rishi Sunak's problems. Right now, the record numbers of small boats arriving to the UK can be partly dismissed by the government saying, look, we wanted to get Rwanda through. That has been blocked by those pesky Labour peers or the courts or Keir Starmer. But what happens if migrants are leaving on flights to Rwanda and the small boats keep arriving on Britain's beaches? Who's to blame them? On the show tonight, we will be discussing the politics and also the policy on a busy evening here in Parliament. Well, this is the scene live in the Lords a few minutes ago. The debate on the Rwanda bill there is due to start in the next 10 minutes or so. But before that happens, and we bring it to you, I just want to take you through where we are on the issue and some of the details, because the problem that the bill is trying to tackle, of course, is stopping the small boats on the beaches. So the number of people crossing the channel in small boats had been rising before the scheme was announced in April 2022. You can see the figures there for small boats arrivals. In that year, a record 45,755 people made that journey. Now, in fairness, the numbers did then come down in 2023, you can see there. But despite the threat of people being sent to Rwanda, they're now rising again. So look at this. By the end of March this year, more than 5,000 had made the journey. Now, that is a record for the first 3 months of this year. The government hasn't said what the total cost of the scheme could be, but an investigation by the public spending watchdog found the total bill could be more than £500 million, plus hundreds of thousands more for each deportee. And it does also seem the public is yet to be convinced it's going to work. This is a YouGov poll from January found that only 8% of people believe the scheme will be very effective, 20% saying they think it will be fairly effective at stopping migrants from making the crossing. More than half of those surveyed here, you can see, said that it would be either not effective or 31% there, not effective at all. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is here with us. So, Beth, a real political moment for Rishi Sunak here.
Yeah, it is a big, significant moment for him, and he called a press conference this morning with two pieces of information, really. The first was his insistence that this bill will go through tonight and he will make the Lords sit until it is through. And the second was just much more detail on this plan and, in fact, doubling down on some of the promises he made and a message to the Lords, don't thwart the bill. I think we've got a clip of that, Sophie.
Last week, yet again, Labour peers in the House of Lords contrived to stop the Safety of Rwanda bill. For almost 2 years, our opponents have used every trick in the book to block flights and keep the boats coming. But enough is enough. No more prevarication, no more delay. Parliament would sit there tonight and vote no matter how late it goes. No ifs, no buts. These flights are going to Rwanda.
It's interesting, this, Sophie, because the Prime Minister's clearly saying that it's the Labour Lords that have thwarted the bill. Many Conservative colleagues of his would say, actually, the Prime Minister could have forced the bill through earlier, before parliamentary recess in Easter, or indeed could have done this ping-pong action in which the Lords amend it, it goes back to the House of Commons, the Commons votes it down, it keeps going back until eventually the Labour Lords have to cede because they aren't going to kill the bill. They're not elected and ultimately they will not thwart the will of Parliament. So there's some discussions within the Conservative Party about, is the Prime Minister, has he delayed the bill? But I think that in the end that will be by the by, because what he did today was, in announcing that he will get flights away, he is delaying them. He said the end of spring. That's the end of May. He's now saying 10 to 12 weeks away. So we're going into July. But what he did was he said, this is not symbolic flights. I will have a regular rhythm of flights. His spokesperson said in a briefing call with journalists, the flights won't stop until the boats stop. What was interesting is how he measured success. I asked him, is this a moment of success? And this is what he said. Prime Minister, you hope to get the flights finally away in the summer. You state your reputation on this policy. Is this a moment of success for you when that bill passes? And do you have to remove thousands of asylum seekers before a general election to close the gap in the polls and regain voters' trust?
Success is when the boats have been stopped. Right? That's what the country expects. That's what the government and I are committed to delivering. And, yes, whilst 10 to 12 weeks from now is later than we wanted, as I've been talking about, the delay for that is crystal clear and obvious to everybody. You heard Labour peers blocking this time and time again last week, again today. But we've been preparing. And I won't rehash all the things that we've been doing. We've been preparing, we're ready, and we will implement this policy.
So it's not just getting flights away, it's stopping the boats. And you yourself were saying, Sophie, at the beginning, boat crossings are going up. So it's almost like he's doubling down on his promise. And I think that matters because in the coming months, he is going to ask the electorate whether they still want him to be Prime Minister. And he's betting it all on making this policy work, despite all the scepticism around, can he get it going? And even if he does get it going, will it stop the boats? And I think actually what you see too is this is a Prime Minister this week trying to get some momentum and stake a narrative ahead of a more imminent verdict at the ballot box, which is it's the local elections at the end of next week, in which he could find his premiership in free fall once more.
It's going to be a really important time, isn't it? Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, our political editor. Now, although the bill has comfortably passed the Commons, maybe on the right of the party have opposed it in the past and expressed scepticism about whether it's going to work. The former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, called it fatally flawed this morning. Well, I spoke to her Conservative colleague, Danny Kruger.
Well, Sophie, I've got some anxieties about it, but the overall principle is the right one, and I'm pleased that the government is pushing back against the Lords, who are trying to introduce amendments that would allow further clogging up of the process of removals, which is ultimately the only way we're going to effectively deter the Channel crossings. We want a fair and humane system that doesn't allow people to jump the queue. And for that, you need to have these removals. Whether it'll work, my anxiety has been that we're still allowing for jurisdiction of the European Court to impose injunctions against the policy. But the Prime Minister has said that he will disregard those injunctions if they're made, so I'm encouraged by that. There's also the opportunity for individual claims to be made against the policy by individual migrants and their lawyers. So there are still some loopholes. But listen, I'm hopeful that where we are will work, and I think we need to give it a best shot we can, and we'll see within a few months whether it's been successful.
I mean, you say you agree with the principle, but listening to you and your concerns about the courts and the legal challenges, it doesn't sound like you think it is actually going to work.
Well, I voted against the bill at third reading because I thought we should start again with a more watertight bill. But the government won the third reading debate and it went to the Lords. The Lords are now trying to weaken it further, and I'm glad the government's standing up to them. So the government, I hope, will see what happens tonight, but I'm sure that they will win. I'll be voting with them all the way. And then we'll see. I mean, I think there is a bigger story here, which is about our membership of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which has jurisdiction through the European Convention, which we all support the principles of, but I'm afraid to say we've seen that the court doesn't respect the UK Parliament as the sovereign power in our country, and fundamentally I think that's incompatible with our democracy. So I'm hopeful that the Rwanda policy will work. If it doesn't, that makes it really obvious we need to leave the European Court, which might well be the battleground for the next election. So I think there's a big story here about who rules in Britain. But let's see. I'm backing the government, and I hope we get this policy to work.
I mean, it feels like Rishi Sunak is saying that he is prepared to potentially leave the ECHR. But at the same time, do you think he's just bluffing? Do you believe him?
Well, I think he's saying that it's not necessary to leave the convention, that we can disregard the court, which is true. I mean, it's a recent sort of principle of British policy that these interim injunctions from Strasbourg should apply. We can disregard those. I think we should leave, and I hope the Prime Minister would accept that if it's a question of a conflict between our democracy, sovereignty of Parliament, and our membership of the European Court and the Convention, then of course our Parliament should come first. He is hopeful, as many colleagues are, possibly a majority still in my party in Parliament, still think we can somehow reconcile our sovereignty with membership of the Convention. This Rwanda policy is a very good test for that, and let's see what happens.
I mean, the Prime Minister says flights to Rwanda will take off in 10 to 12 weeks. Do you think they will? Would you put a bet on that?
I think there might be some flights taking off because I'm hopeful, I'm confident that the government has lined up some dozens, maybe 100 or 200 people for whom the legal case against for deportation is watertight. So I expect there will be some flights, but what we need is enough flights consistently to ensure that everybody understands, the gang masters and their customers, the illegal migrants, understand there is no point crossing the channel and trying to come to the UK because you will be removed. So it's not a question of just getting one or two flights off. We need enough flights to act as an effective deterrent. That will be the real test of whether the policy is working, but I am hopeful we'll get some flights off, and that would be a great triumph for the government. I'd be very, very pleased to see it, but I think we are going to need a little more than one or two flights.
You say it would be a great triumph for the government, but, I have to ask if that is really, the spin that we should be putting on this. It's like 2 years since this policy was first announced. Rishi Sunak promised us that flights would be taken off by the spring. I mean, even if he gets what he wants, June, July, is that the spring? Have I got my months wrong all this time?
Well, we have a country in which power is quite dispersed. The House of Lords is able to clog things up, and crucially, the courts are. I'm afraid we also have a European Court, which has the power to clog things up. So you can't fault the Prime Minister for trying hard and pushing this through as hard as he can. I think we could have had a slightly tougher bill, but I respect his decision on that. I think he has made every effort to ensure that we get this policy into practice. I'm sure that they're ready operationally to get these flights off, and I think we should should all acknowledge his achievement when this bill passes and when those flights take off. But as I say, I think the public really want to see the boats stop, not just the flights start. And for the boats to stop, we need enough flights to ensure that the deterrent is meaningful.
Can I ask about the strategy for this? Because it feels to me like we spent so long talking about this. And look, I absolutely acknowledge that many people are very concerned about immigration, particularly illegal immigration, small boat crossings. You know, what is the Conservative Party's message to people who are worried about not being able to get a GP appointment or that they can't get their kids into a good school? Oh, don't worry, you know, we sent 50 people to Rwanda at a cost of £1.8 million each. I mean, is that really going to be a good message on the doorstep?
Well, not on its own, Sophie, and I understand if you don't think it matters that we have tens of thousands of people getting into our country illegally, jumping the queue that needs to be for genuine
That's really not what I'm saying, by the way.
Vulnerable people from the world. OK, well, I'm glad to hear it, because I think it matters to everybody that we have secure borders. And your point about public services is a very important one as well. Absolutely those things matter. One reason why we have such delays in our public services because of migration, not just the illegal migration, but because of the high numbers of legal migrants that we're receiving, and the government is taking significant steps to reduce that. But yes, I take your broader point, and I recognise that on its own, the question of border security is not sufficient as a message for the government. We need to demonstrate we are improving people's lives on the economy, on crime, on defence, and on public services. And there is a coherent Conservative argument on all of those topics. But this one comes out consistently at or near the top of people's concerns. Legal migration and control of our borders, the sovereignty of the UK, these things matter enormously. If we can't secure our borders, we can't do anything.
The Prime Minister's made this a defining issue of his premiership. We understand he's having drinks for Conservative MPs later on, 9:30, I think, sort of squeezed in between the votes. Have you got an invite? Are you going to go along?
Do you know, I don't know. I hope so. If it's extended to all MPs, I don't know what I'll be doing. Yes, we don't quite know the timetable for tonight. We've just rejected these amendments, so the Lords have now got to consider that. They might add some more in, and we'll be backwards and forwards. So I think we might be here for quite a while. And if I'm free, I might pop in and congratulate the PM on getting this far.
Yeah, definitely sitting in for a long night. Just one more question to squeeze in, if I may. The timing of this really matters, of course, ahead of the local elections. On the programme last week, Tim Montgomery, the Conservative commentator, suggested that he thought there could be a leadership challenge in a couple of weeks' time, depending on the outcome of those local elections. Is that something you're picking up?
Well, you certainly have some disgruntled colleagues, but I think we're all focused on trying to save our councillors and our police and crime commissioners. We actually have a very good record in local government, and in Wiltshire that I represent, our police and crime commissioner has done a brilliant job. So I really, really hope that we don't get a bad result on May the 2nd. I think overall there's a big story about what our party is offering the country. I've been campaigning for a manifesto and a platform that leans into that great realignment of politics that happened in 2019. I think that's where the public want us to be, whether it's in the Shires and the heartlands that I represent or in our new red wall constituencies. It's the same message about common sense, patriotic conservatism. And I think if the PM successfully offers that, we've got a good chance of recovering our position. But at the moment, things are looking a bit difficult, but let's see. I'm hopeful the local elections will change the narrative.
Oh, that story is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Zoe Grunwald, the political correspondent at The Independent, and Ryan Saby, deputy political editor at The Sun. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Conservative MP, Tim Loughton, who's also on the Home Affairs Committee, which has done a lot of work looking at this bill, and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, that's Daisy Cooper. Thanks very much for being with us. Thanks for christening our new studio as well. Good to have you here. And for hot-footing it over a very busy night for both of you, I'm sure, voting in the Commons as well. Daisy, what are you hoping happens?
Well, Liberal Democrats have voted against this bill at every single stage. The fact is that it is an enormous amount of money that the government is spending on this issue, money that could have been spent instead on creating 5.8 million GP appointments. But no, they've spent 240 million on this scheme instead. We think it's unworkable, we think it's immoral, and therefore we'll continue to vote against it. So we'll see what happens this evening, but be in no doubt that Liberal Democrats have opposed it at every single stage. We've said repeatedly what needs to happen is the government needs to reintroduce safe and legal routes, scrap this unworkable, expensive scheme, and spend the money on getting the backlog down and making sure that claims are processed efficiently.
I'm interested in your view, Tim. What do you want to see happen this evening? Do you think you're hoping for it to go
This
through?
bill needs to go through. We've been debating it to within an inch of its life for the last 3 months. We finished it in the Commons back in the new year. We sent it on to the House of Lords, and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. We had absolutely nothing new to debate with the amendments that came back earlier today. Everyone, I think, has had their say. The government has given a whole load of assurances as to why the amendments put forward are not actually necessary. Various safeguards around people coming from Afghanistan and others as well. So I think now let the legislation go through and we need the Rwanda scheme to start. It's going to take a few more weeks before all the preparations and the legal work and everything is ready. But I think the public is completely frustrated. Let's get the legislation through, let's get the plane started, and then let's see if that works. And it has a deterrent effect on the boats coming across the channel.
Do you think it will work?
I do, and for this reason. So last year, the Home Affairs Select Committee went to Calais. We met everyone involved in the whole migrant operation over there, the police, the army, the civil servants and everybody. And a really interesting thing they said to us is when the government announced the Rwanda scheme, which was now May of 2022, there was a surge of migrants who were from Calais or camped around Calais, approaching the French authorities to try and regularise their position in France because they did not want to run the risk of being put on a plane to Rwanda. So we know that there is a deterrent effect there. But of course, that deterrent effect can only be credible if the project starts. And since then, of course, not a single plane has taken off. That is why it's so important that the planes take off and that clear message goes out that if you come across the channel in that way, the most dangerous, the most inappropriate way, whatever you think of how many people we should be taking, it'll be a lottery as to whether you end up in a hotel in Kent or on a plane to Rwanda. Let's see if that works.
I mean, the government have made such a mess of this scheme. I mean, the government, by its own estimates, say that a few hundred people might be able to be taken to Rwanda. But don't forget, the Public Accounts Committee have said there are 40,000 people who arrived in this country by small boats who are not eligible to apply for asylum here and can't be deported to Rwanda either. So the idea that even getting this bill through is a success is ridiculous. It's going to be incredibly expensive. And I do think the only thing I would agree with Tim on is when he says the public is frustrated. But they're frustrated for a different reason, because the NHS is on its knees. We're in a cost of living crisis. And this Conservative government has chosen to spend the last 2 years talking about this scheme rather than fixing the NHS and the cost of living crisis.
Well, I think the government's been doing all of those things. It is
really
unsustainable that we have people coming across in small boats. We need more safe and legal routes. Those are the amendments I put forward to the legal migration bill, which the government accepted. We will have those safe and legal routes. But people who do not have a claim, a credible claim, to apply for asylum in the UK will not be using safe and legal routes. They will still be using people smugglers, the most dangerous way of coming into the UK. And there is a basic, important question which Daisy, the Liberals, the Labour opposition to all of this have failed to answer. Of those 40,000 who've come across since the illegal migration bill and others still in the system, there are many you cannot return physically to their countries of origin because they just won't let them get off the plane or they put them in jail. So for those people, you have got to have a solution if they have no credible claim to be applying for asylum in the UK, effectively jumping the queue from those genuine asylum seekers that we have a duty of care. Where do you send them? And that is what the Rwanda scheme is designed to help with.
That's not correct. What the Rwanda
It's
scheme
entirely
is doing,
correct.
No, what the Rwanda scheme is doing is you're not allowing people to actually make their claim whilst they're here in the UK, and if they don't have an eligible claim, you send them to Rwanda. What the scheme that the government is introducing actually does is we're taking them to Rwanda to even process the claim in the first place, and irrespective of the outcome of that claim, they still have to stay in Rwanda. So the way you're describing it is simply not correct.
No, the problem is that if they apply in the UK and they are found not to have a credible claim, If they come from Iran, from Eritrea, countries like that, you simply cannot deport them from the UK. This way, they will go to Rwanda to make their claim, and if they don't have a claim, they will not be in the UK. They will be looked after in Rwanda, or they can choose to go elsewhere. You have got to have a solution for what you do with those people. Otherwise, there are thousands more coming here illegally who are using our services, using hotels and accommodation that are effectively here for the foreseeable future. You have no solution to that, and that's what the Rwanda scheme actually tries to come up with a solution for.
We have been absolutely clear that for people who have a legitimate claim, there should be safe and legal routes, and they should be reopened. Many of the safe and legal routes that your party, the Conservative government, have closed down. The Rwanda scheme should be scrapped because we know it's not going to work.
So what do you do with those people who can't return?
And the money should be spent on processing the claims right here by spending £6,000.
And then what do you do if they haven't got a claim to
I'm going to
stay
have
here?
to
How
jump
do you deport
in.
them?
We're out of time on this chat.
That's
Thank you
the
both.
major question.
Thank you
Can't
both
answer.
very much indeed. Really lively chat. I think we've seen all sides of the debate here. You know, it's definitely something that gets, well, MPs, Lords, viewers, everyone will have a view on it as well. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Parliament prepares for a late-night sitting as Rishi Sunak insists his Rwanda bill will pass tonight. No ifs, no buts. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, urges his party's candidates to fly the flag on St George's Day tomorrow, and he calls for more team games in schools, saying sport is a cornerstone of national identity. And as Donald Trump's hush money trial gets underway, the former president declares it's a sad day for America. Target towns like Grimsby and Cleethorpes will help decide who wins the next election. But here, like in so many towns, some people are indifferent about polling day. Join me, Sophy Ridge, for a Politics Hub special, when we meet those who say they don't want to vote. What will change their minds and yours?
Push the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm gonna have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News, the top stories. Parliament is voting tonight on the Rwanda bill as Rishi Sunak says his bill will pass, no ifs, no buts. Well, Donald Trump has been in court for the first day of his criminal hush money trial. The former president says it's a sad day for America. He's been complaining that he should be elsewhere. And Keir Starmer has been telling Sky News about patriotism, national identity and foreigners owning football clubs. We're going to be hearing from him a little later on the programme. He's been speaking to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in Westminster on our digital Politics Hub too, including, of course, tonight's votes on Rwanda by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Among the other stories that we've been covering that you can read about today is this one. Details on how two men have been charged with breaching the Official Secrets Act on behalf of China. Now, both men were arrested in March last year. They've since been on police bail while under investigation. Train drivers who are members of the ASLEF union at 16 companies have announced fresh strike dates as part of their long-running dispute over pay. Drivers at different companies will walk out on various dates next month. Plus, don't forget the latest episode of Politics with Jack and Sam is out this week. There they are. They have been talking about how Rishi Sunak is apparently trying to save his skin by seizing the headlines this week. All that and much more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Well, let's get an update, shall we, on what's been going on in the Lords and what it means for Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop the boats. We can have a look at the scene over there right now. Now, our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, is in Calais for us. We'll be speaking to him in just a moment. But first, let's go to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who is in Central Lobby. John, what is the latest?
Some breaking news, Sophie, because in the last couple of minutes, the government minister in the Lords, that's Lord Sharp of Epsom, has announced a concession to Des Brown, the former Labour Defence Secretary, who has been battling on behalf of those Afghan veterans who helped British forces in Afghanistan. That could well mean, and I'm told it will mean, that Lord Brown will not move his amendment to a vote. We are expecting one other vote, though, in the Lords. That's on this issue of an independent monitoring committee on the question of whether Afghanistan is safe or not. However, let me tell you what Lord Sharp has just said. He said, in answering Lord Brown, he said the Ministry of Defence has decided to undertake reassessment of all eligibility decisions made on ineligible applications with credible claims that have links to Afghan specialist units. The reassessment's being done by a team independent of those who conducted the original casework. Once this review of these decisions has concluded, the government will not remove to Rwanda those who have received a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review, where they are already in the UK as of today. The government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who've shared courage by serving alongside us, and we will not let them down, he said. So that has just happened in the last minute or two at the beginning of the latest round of ping pong. And I am told by opponents of the Rwanda bill in the Lords that Lord Brown will accept that concession to protect the people who risk their lives in many cases for the UK forces over in Afghanistan. So he won't, I'm told, press it to a vote now. If he does, he'll accept the concession later, I'm told. But a major breakthrough, really, after months and months of the government insisting they're not going to make any concessions or allow any amendments to the bill. Finally, at the 11th hour, almost literally, the government has backed down to this on this very contentious issue of the Afghan veterans who risked being deported to Rwanda. So a major breakthrough here for those opponents of the bill, those campaigners for those Afghan interpreters and so on. And it looks as though Lord Des Brown will not now push that to a vote. So it probably means we don't need our sleeping bags and our camp beds for the early hours of tomorrow morning.
Well, let's see, John. Don't count your chickens yet. There's still some more for the government to get through. Thanks very much indeed, John Craig there from Central Lobby. Well, let's pick up now, shall we, with our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons, who's in Calais for us. Because, Adam, the success and failure of this policy is going to be determined where you are, whether or not it's going to act as a deterrent.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sophie. Welcome to a windswept northern French beach. And as you have that debate in Westminster, this is the reality. It is what happens here. A little earlier on, we were on a beach and we saw the remains of a migrant boat. We've just been driving along a road up there next to a very big camp and seeing large groups of men walking down the road. Are they heading towards the beach? Not sure at the moment. It's windy, a little choppy out at sea, not good conditions for being on a boat, but over the night that will calm down, and there's a small period of time where it's expected to be much calmer out there. Could be a good time to launch a boat. For that, you'll need a people smuggler, and of course those are the people who operate in these camps, gathering together dozens of people, taking maybe a couple of $1,000s off each of them, and then supplying them with a dinghy, an engine, and basically pointing them in the right direction. And ranged against them, the police patrols who come up and down beaches like this one, planes up in the sky. I can tell you that in the small hours of this morning, there will be police patrolling along here, playing that game where they try to catch the smugglers, try to stop them getting into the water. Once the boat gets into the water, that is pretty much game over, according to the French laws of engagement. And after that, it's up to the British authorities to do something when that boat gets into British waters. The big imponderable, Sophie, you said it, is will there be a deterrent factor if this Rwanda law is brought in? My guess is you've got a sliding scale here. If an enormous number of people are taken straight from arriving in Britain, briefly detained and then taken out to Rwanda, then of course word of that would get back. But I think it would take quite a few. If at the other end of the scale you're talking about maybe dozens, couple of hundred, well, bearing in mind you've got tens of thousands going across, one suspects that that would have a very limited deterrent. Remember, there's been about 75,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats since this Rwanda legislation was first proposed. And when you talk to migrants, as we did a few days ago, and ask them about this, what you don't get is a sense of fear. What you do get is a variety, either defiance or sort of pointed ignorance. One person who just used a litany of swear words to describe his opinion. And then a fourth who said he simply didn't believe this, who said that he was, in offence, thought it was lies. A fifth one taking a moral position with me and saying it would be completely unfair for Britain to send him to Rwanda when what he wanted was asylum. The question, will it be a deterrence? The answer, I'm afraid, I don't know. And frankly, at the moment, nobody else does either.
Bit of honesty. We like to see that. Thank you very much, Adam. Adam Parsons speaking to us there. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Well, we heard from John Craig there that the Lords have partly conceded, but now have parliamentarians dealt with late-night sittings in years gone by? We'll find out. Plus, after the break, a sad day for America. That's how Donald Trump described the first day of his criminal hush money trial. Hello, welcome back to the US now, where Donald Trump has been accused of orchestrating a criminal scheme to corrupt the 2016 presidential election during opening remarks at his hush money trial in New York. The former president is charged with falsifying business records to cover up a payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels, who he denies having an affair with. Well, arriving at court, he described it as a very sad day in America. He's just left court after day one of the trial ended early. He's accused of falsifying those business records to keep the affair secret, although he does deny the claims.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning. And it's very unfair. Fortunately, the poll numbers are very good. They've been going up because people understand what's going on. This is a witch hunt and it's a shame. And it comes out of Washington. It's in coordination with Washington, everything, including the DA's office. It's in coordination with Washington. I just want people to understand that this is done for purposes of hurting the opponent of the worst president in the history of our country.
Donald Trump speaking there. Now to football during a visit to the home of England's football teams ahead of St George's Day. So Keir Starmer has said sporting talent runs deep in the nation's psyche and forms a cornerstone of our national life. Well, the Labour leader said children are currently being locked out of emulating their heroes, and he pledged to promote talent. Now, he's been speaking to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
To the home of England's football teams for Keir Starmer, mixing with future Lionesses.
Who's the team that you think that we've got to beat them?
Everyone. The election fixture, his focus. The Labour leader at St George's Park pitching his plans for sport, talking exclusively to Sky News.
How will you fund sport when there's defence, housing, security to be able to fund, and the finances are so stretched?
Of course it's going to be tight. The economy has been broken under this government, but there are things that we can do in terms of the funding that goes into our schools.
Does this mean no more playing fields sold off under a Labour government?
It doesn't mean no more playing fields, but we've got a deficit of football pitches, so we need more pitches, not less pitches.
The football regulator bill's going through Parliament.
Yes.
You seem happy with the government.
Well, I think there's a cross-party consensus that we need a regulator.
The regulator won't be looking at foreign ownership. Are you happy with countries lacking democracy, without LGBT rights, without full women's rights? Are you happy with them owning national institutions like Premier League clubs or any club?
There's a role, obviously, for the Secretary of State under the bill, as it's drafted, it may be amended as we go along, to set the guidance in place. And I think that's the place where we need to look at the detail of it.
But it does talk in the bill about the regulator needing to have regard for foreign and trade policy. Should morality be at the expense of the money and the finances?
Well, I think this is something which we're going to have to tease out in the bill as we go through it.
You're an Arsenal fan. You've got Visit Rwanda on your shirt, a country with human rights abuses, lacking democratic freedoms. Are you happy with them funding your club and your team?
Well, I think there's a massive difference between supporting a team and the gimmick that the government is wasting hundreds of millions of taxpayer money on and having not removed a single person to Rwanda.
Obviously, we talked about you being an Arsenal fan. You know, many think Arsene Wenger might have gone on too long, staying 2 decades, the success in his first decade. Do you think a decade is enough in power if you were to become Prime Minister?
Look, we haven't even won one election yet.
Keir Starmer making sport an election battleground, pledging to give more youngsters the chance to emulate Serena Wiegmann's Lionesses is an election-winning tactic. Rob Harris, Sky News, Staffordshire.
We had to do a bit of football tonight. Our show editor, Darren's a Coventry City fan. So, you know, after the heroics against Man U yesterday, it only feels right. Keir Starmer, man of the people, football. I mean, do you think he has a kind of whiff of confidence about him at the minute, Tim?
Well, he didn't answer those questions very well, I thought. Look, sport is really important. When I was Children's Minister, I was really keen that we did more sport in schools. Far too many kids were attached to screens, and that's probably got worse. We need to be doing much more physical activity, particularly getting girls to do more physical activity. There's a real problem as girls grow up as teenagers. They tend to drop sport. Now, you've got the Lionesses. I think that's made a huge difference. They need those sort of role models to see that actually girls, women can be as successful at a sport as we saw the men do, and actually they're more successful, as we've seen from the Lionesses.
It's a good point, actually. I mean, I really enjoy watching sport, and I did exactly what you said, you know, kind of hit puberty, just gave it all up. Yeah, it's definitely a thing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely it is. And, I mean, I've seen, you know, in St Albans, where I'm the MP, there are some fantastic new schemes that have started, designed specifically to get girls and women back into playing sport and football in particular. So we've got a fantastic football club, St Albans City Football Club, but we've got this new programme, which is Women Play Football, which is run at one of our local community centres. And it's really taken off. And a lot of women who have never played football or who gave up sport when they were at school are now starting again. So actually, I think Tim's right. We do need, particularly for young people and young girls in particular, to get involved. But it's never too late to start. And actually, given the sort of the health burden that we have, we're all getting, as a population, we're ageing, we're living longer with more illnesses. We all need to be more active, whether that's strength exercises or whether it's active sport.
On Keir Starmer, a bit more widely, you said there that you didn't think he answered the questions very well. He's doing pretty well, though, in the polls, isn't he? You know, the recent, you know, if you look at his personal ratings, they're far outstripping Rishi Sunak.
Sure. Look, we're not in a good place in the polls. There's no denying that. But with an election a few months away, 3, 6, however long it is, it's no good just saying the Tories are rubbish, we'll do better. Because there is a prospect that when people go and vote at the general election, it will really make a difference to a change of government. And so you need to be voting for a government that is going to do stuff that you want to see them do and that you agree with. So the pressure is now on Starmer and his team to come up with the detail behind the slogans. And I think they are going to struggle over the coming months to really extrapolate their policy into detailed promises and pledges that are deliverable. They are going to have all the sorts of problems we've had with small boats, with the cost of living crisis, with energy prices and what's still going on in Ukraine. It's not just as easy to say, oh, the Tories are rubbish, we'll do much, much better.
You might win an election doing that, mightn't you, though?
Well, I think right now there's millions of people who actually haven't made up their minds on how they're going to vote. And certainly, you know, as a Liberal Democrat, what I can say is a vote for the Lib Dems is to fix the NHS, to solve the cost of living crisis and sort out our local environment. And I think people look at the record of the Conservatives on those 3 issues and you can see why they're doing so badly in the polls.
What about Starmer, though? I mean, are you just going to be focusing on the Conservatives rather than Labour, really?
Well, the Conservatives are the ones in power at the moment, and Liberal Democrats are campaigning in 80 seats around the country where we're in second place to the Conservatives, what we call the Blue Wall, and we're hoping to win as many of those seats as possible off the Conservatives.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Lively chat, always good to have a range of opinions on stuff on the Politics Hub as well. Still to come on the show tonight.
Ping pong was invented on the dining tables of England, ladies and gentlemen, in the 19th century. It was called whiff-waff.
Well, Parliament could be on for a game of late-night whiff-waff. We're going to remind you of some other late-night sittings in Parliament.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll bring you the twists and turns on the Rwanda bill as MPs and peers settle in for what could be a very late night of votes. Also to come, the Metropolitan Police under pressure again. This is over the treatment of a Jewish man at a pro-Palestine march. We'll hear from the Met's former Director of Professional Standards. And we'll speak to the London pub swarmed by Swifties after a coded reference in one of Taylor's new songs.
I think it's going to be a really interesting way to gather data so that we're able to really, truly understand what's going on. And it's an opportunity for people like myself who have had these experiences and various artists to talk about their stories and to make this a subject matter that we can all learn to accelerate change and make a difference so that we're not in this place where this has become normalised. I think a lot of the time, even when you're seeing the successes within the music industry amongst Black women, there's a lot of nuances and things going on in the background. There's a lot of interactions happening with the people that you're working with that you tend to stay quiet about, and you don't speak, and it's not a transparent conversation until now. So it wasn't a surprise to me at all. I mean, within my own circles of other Black women and people that mentors that have come before me, this is a conversation that we've always had internally, despite of the successes that might accompany it. So yeah, I wasn't surprised at all. And this is the reason why I wanted to be part of this campaign, to contribute to those stories and experiences coming out and for us to accelerate change. There were overt forms of racism where words were said to me that were awful, which I can't say on camera. But also it's the subtle nuances, the microaggressions that come through in your everyday experience, whether it's me having to Europeanize myself, or if my hair isn't a certain way, having to dress and be a certain way and feeling under pressure to not embrace my Blackness or my identity. There was also lots of social media bullying as well, where there would be comments that would be said to me in reference to my race. A sense of sexism and the patriarchy, where there's a transactional sense of manipulation, where I have to do something and to fragment myself in order to have success. And so you have this sense of pressure as a woman and as a Black woman to act a certain way in order to progress in your career.
Hello, welcome back. Now, it's been more than 20 years since MPs voted to abandon regular late-night sittings in the House of Commons, but occasionally, like tonight, they do still happen. So we thought we'd kind of mark the moment by finding out how well our panellists know what MPs actually get up to during the late-night sessions, and do feel free to guess at home. If you know any of these, then maximum points at home. It's pretty impressive.
This is a bit worrying.
Don't worry. No wrong answers, I feel, to some of these questions. The first question is this. Under which Prime Minister did the next day's Prime Minister's questions have to be cancelled after an all-night sitting? Which Prime Minister? Living Prime Minister? Gosh. Have a little guess.
Theresa May.
Theresa May.
Tony Blair, I think.
Well, it was... I think we can show... It was Tony Blair. Was that a guess?
No, I was there. Because if the business is still going up 5 o'clock, you lose the next day's business.
Oh, there you go.
And we had to talk through the night in those days to keep it going to 5 o'clock in some cases.
So it was like a proper...
Yeah, and I remember doing it in one of the first budgets, and after I got elected in 1997, we had to keep the finance bill going through the night in committees so that some business would be lost. So Nick Gibb, my near neighbour, the MP for Bognor Regis, and I discussed the Brighton to Bognor Regis railway timetable and the impact of government cuts on railways or whatever for several hours in the little hours. It was a huge triumph and completely and utterly pointless. So I'm glad we don't do that anymore.
There you go. I think that really is a bit of an insight into the kind of workings of Parliament. But yeah, like you say, not so much happening now. But yeah, I'm not sure what...
That's been condemned to the dustbin of history.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah, exactly. Right, now, in ping-pong situations, which is what we're seeing tonight, when it kind of bounces between the houses, some members of the House of Lords reportedly choose to pass the time by watching movies. But which films do they watch? This was according to the former BBC parliamentary correspondent Mark Darcy. What film... No stickering, sorry. What films do they watch in the House of Lords?
I mean, as long as they're not looking up tractors, I don't really care.
It's not going to have Stormy Daniels in them, that's for sure, isn't it? Probably.
Oh my God.
Hopes. Something in black and white, I should think.
Yeah. Well, it's not quite black and white. The answer is... Apparently, 007. James Bond was a favourite. Skyfall among the movies the Lords would watch during those long-lasting sittings, as well as perhaps the slightly more appropriate Spirit of 45.
Well, they have got a former head of MI6 in the Lords,
yeah.
Or MI5, one of the two.
There you go. Not tractors, at least. Late-night sittings gained a bit of a reputation as nights where MPs often had a little bit too much to drink, shall we, and some of Parliament's bars.
Outrageous.
Outrageous slurs. Which former Prime Minister was seen vomiting behind the Speaker's chair after 3 bottles of port?
Pitt the Younger.
Oh, very good.
Good knowledge.
There he is. Excellent knowledge. That was very good. Yeah, 2-0 to Tim, I have to say.
He had a £40,000 drinks bill on his death, which Parliament paid for.
That is not... That's quite a sum
In
of
those
money.
days, it was quite a lot, yes.
Yeah, apparently his defence was that his doctor actually recommended the drinking, said it was good for him, apparently.
Yeah, that's what I always say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Speaking of drinks, apparently Rishi Sunak's hosting some drinks later tonight, 9:30 p.m. You heading along, Tim, or...?
I've got lots of work to do. Besides, I've got a full fridge of drinks in my office, but...
Is that a snub?
No, there's a... No, I shall go and see my colleagues. We shall get instructions as what's going to happen later on tonight, so have a sociable drink with the Prime Minister. A cold beer or a warm Chardonnay, one of the two, probably.
I guess you haven't had an invite, Dave, do you?
No, and I do think I do think the public will be shocked to see that after passing this very cruel piece of legislation, Rishi Sunak and some of his chums want to celebrate. I think
We're not celebrating. You're having a drink.
Well, it sounds like it's a celebratory drink.
You lot need to get out more on the Lib Dems.
The public will make up their minds.
There you go. How long do you think it's going to go on for tonight, then? Do you think we're settling in for a long evening, or do you feel that now that amendment has had the concession accepted, do you think it's going to speed things along a bit?
I think it's hard to tell. It'll be in the hands of the crossbenchers, I think, in the House of Lords, as to and maybe some of the Labour peers as well. All I can say from our side is Lib Dems will keep voting against it for as long as we have to, but we'll see. We'll see, soon enough.
What's your sense, Tim?
I think the Labour opposition will melt away. I mean, Labour don't want to be seen to be wrecking this bill, because actually the public do want to see something happen. So they've made a song and dance about it. They said this is terrible. They've stuck their heels in. They've got a concession, and I think now they'll walk away, which will leave the crossbenchers and a few of the others in the trenches. So I think it will all go through tonight.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Great to have you on the panel this evening. That is it from us tonight, but I'm going to be hanging around as those votes happen. I'll also see you tomorrow right here, 7 p.m.
It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. A developing story in Westminster this evening as MPs and peers settle in for what could be a very late night. This is after the Prime Minister told Parliament to sit for as long as it takes to pass his flagship Rwanda policy.
Well, voting will be ping-ponging between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The Prime Minister says it will bounce back in a game of parliamentary ping-pong. We'll bring you all of the twists and turns live from Westminster.
Also to come tonight, the Metropolitan Police under pressure once again, this time over the treatment of a Jewish man at a pro-Palestine march. Amid calls for the Commissioner to stand down, we'll be hearing from the Met's former Director of Professional Standards. Plus, Nottingham Forest demands the VAR audio is released. This is after 3 key decisions went against them at the weekend. And we'll speak to the London pub swarmed by Swifties after a name check in one of Taylor Swift's new songs. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Well, we start this evening with yet more political back and forth over the government's controversial plan to send migrants to Rwanda. As the Prime Minister vows, it will pass through Parliament and become law tonight, no matter what. Stopping the boats has been one of Rishi Sunak's 5 key pledges. And today he said that MPs and peers will sit through the night, if needed to get his legislation through. Well, let's head to Westminster now. The bill currently in the House of Lords. Our lead politics presenter, Sophy Ridge, standing by. So, Sophie, bring us up to date with what point we're at on all of this at the moment.
It feels a bit like we're in the nursery rhyme, the Grand Old Duke of York. We kind of keep being marched up the hill, back again. We think it's going to happen, we think it's not going to happen. Flights take off in the spring, flights take off in the summer. We're told that tonight is the night it's going to get through Parliament finally. So at the minute, what's happening is the House of Lords are currently debating the bill. One of them, we're told, one of the amendments that the House of Lords want to put forward, they've accepted the concession on. So that is inching closer to Rishi Sunak's plans getting through Parliament and into law. But I guess the bigger picture here is that it's been 2 years in the making, this policy, and it will clearly be a significant political achievement if Rishi Sunak does manage to get it through. At the same time, though, that's really when the hard work begins. Will he be able to get those flights off? And crucially, of course, will it work? Will it be a deterrent? I mean, that really do wait and see. Well, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John's with us now. John,
hot foot from the House of Lords.
Yeah, you've just made it back, haven't you?
I've just been sitting in the House of Lords. The press gallery in the Commons is big. The press gallery in the Lords is a tiny little place. I mean, it's like going from a Premier League football ground to a non-league ground, honestly. It's tiny, the Lords press gallery. But we've just heard a major development in the Lords because first of all, we had Lord Sharp of Epsom, who's the minister steering this bill through, make a major concession. And Lord Brown, that's Des Brown, the former Labour Defence Secretary, accepting that concession. All about those Afghan interpreters, of course, who, according to critics of the bill, risk being deported to Rwanda in what critics, of course, said was a shameful way to treat people who'd risked their lives. And let me summarise what Lord Sharp of Epsom said. He said that the Ministry of Defence is going to undertake a reassessment of the eligibility decisions made on these people with links to Afghan specialist units, he said. The reassessment's being done by a team independent of those who conducted the original casework. Once that's concluded, the government will not remove to Rwanda those who've received a positive eligibility decision as a result of the review. They're already in the UK as of today. And it says the government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who've shared courage by serving alongside us. We will not let them down, he said. So, up gets Des Brown next to say that he may not push his amendment to a vote, and he hoped the next Labour government would sort all this out. So, it looks as though we're probably just going to get one vote in the Lords. That's on the other amendment, which is all about this independent monitoring committee to look into whether or not Rwanda is a safe country. The Lords will probably press that to a vote, back to the Commons with that, then back to the Lords, and at that time, All the signs are that Labour will say, enough, that's it. So we won't be up all night. It'll all be done and dusted probably by midnight. The bill probably then get its royal assent at some point later this week, because I don't suppose they'll get Prince Charles out of bed to give this royal assent.
Yeah, that's true. Midnight.
King Charles. I said Prince Charles then.
Well, you can put your sleeping bag away for the night then.
I think so.
I think. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. And SJ, as we were saying, of course, the House of Lords currently debating these, but it feels as though Rishi Sunak is going to get his way. A big moment for his premiership. He's deliberately put this Rwanda policy right at the heart of his premiership. But now it's going to be crunch time. We're going to find out if it really does stop the boats or not.
OK, no sleepover for the Westminster politics team. We'll keep you abreast of what happens throughout the evening, though. Sophie and John, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Mayor of London has insisted tonight that he has full confidence in the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. This is after a growing row over the treatment of an anti-Semitism campaigner during a pro-Palestinian march in London. Gideon Falter accused the Met of victim blaming after being told being openly Jewish was provocative while he attempted to walk through that demonstration. Well, Sir Mark Rowley, met the Mayor of London today and the Home Secretary and made calls for him to resign. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt has more.
I want to walk to that paper, that's what I'm going to do. So, if you just say that.
10 days on from the altercation, no let-up in the war of words.
The reality was he came to the march with an entourage of 4 to 5 people and a film crew, sought to break through the stewards, physically pushes himself past the police.
I was simply Jewish in the vicinity of these marches, and what we know from 6 months of this is that at these marches we see constant incidents of glorification of terrorism. We see people engaging in all sorts of anti-Semitic hatred, as I saw at that march then.
Mr Falter wants the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, to resign or be sacked over the words his officer used. The Prime Minister agreed about the language, but wanted Sir Mark to stay.
I do have confidence in him, but that's on the basis that he works to rebuild the confidence and trust of not just the Jewish community, but the wider public.
The Commissioner got the same message of support from the Mayor of London.
He's quite clear of the importance of making sure that all communities in London are safe and feel safe. Sir Mark has my full confidence.
This former Met officer said the whole video sequence shot by Sky News showed the officer involved had offered to help Mr Falter get around the marchers.
Mr Falter wasn't interested in that, and then he tried to push past the police officers, wasn't prepared to listen and wanted to go against the flow of the march. Now, if I'd been on duty as a police officer at that time, I would have been inclined to have arrested him for assault.
At Scotland Yard, the Commissioner was said to be calm and ready to keep talking about the protests. The Commissioner met Jewish community leaders in a video call. Again, he apologised for the altercation with Mr Falter. They urged the Commissioner to cut the number of protests, move them to less disruptive locations and to clamp down on demonstrators committing crimes. The fallout from the march also prompted a meeting with the Home Secretary, the Commissioner's main political master, but he too was backing the police chief.
Well, let's go to Martin now. He joins us live from New Scotland Yard. And Rowley coming out fighting tonight, it seems, Martin.
He has indeed. I mean, everybody we've been speaking to today, apart from Mr Falter, of course, has said, yes, the language used by the police sergeant at that altercation 10 days ago was appalling, but it didn't warrant the resignation of Sir Mark Rowley, and he clearly is cheered by that. And tonight, Sir Mark has spoken to The Guardian. We've been trying to talk to him all day, but he's chosen The Guardian to speak to just as he was going into that meeting, scheduled meeting with the Home Secretary. And Sir Mark has praised the professionalism, that's his word, of that police sergeant involved in that altercation. And he says that that officer will not be disciplined. The Commissioner goes on that the sergeant at the scene clearly assessed that there was a risk of confrontation and was trying to help Mr. Falter find a different route around the march. I completely understand, says the Commissioner, why the sergeant made this assessment. A couple of turns of phrase were clumsy and offensive, he accepts, but he makes the point that he and the Metropolitan Police have apologised for that use of that language. He said, what was the alternative? Would we have stood back and let the two sides clash and then had to go in and pick up the pieces afterwards? Mr. Falter has said during the day that he felt that 90% of Jews felt it was unsafe to go into central London while those marches were being held. The Commissioner has denied that. He said the streets aren't too dangerous for Jews during those pro-Palestinian demos. So that's the word tonight from the Commissioner. There's a lot of stuff happening this week. He's meeting Jewish community leaders again on Thursday. They've been invited to sit around a table and look at the plans ahead for the next meeting, the next march, the pro-Palestinian march on Saturday. And of course, Mr. Falter, he too says he'll be there and he'll be testing what's happening, and he will be, of course, drawing the spotlight not only on himself, but on the Metropolitan Police and the Commissioner.
Martin, thank you. Martin Brunt live at New Scotland Yard for us this evening. Well, let's get more on this story now. I'm joined by the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner, who is also the Director of Professional Standards at the Metropolitan Police, Stephen Roberts. Stephen, good to see you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on the UK Tonight. First of all, having watched the video, it's some 13 minutes long. It's been clipped up in shorter edits on social media. But to watch the exchange between the police officer and Mr. Falter, what was your takeaway from it, from the exchange?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is that Sky itself deserves some credit for capturing the entire incident. What we first saw and what politicians unfortunately reacted to was a very short clip without context that, yes, portrayed some very unfortunate, very clumsy language that didn't take account of the special sensitivities of the Jewish community. But what we've seen, I think, is a police officer trying to do his duty, showing patience, enormous courtesy, and indeed enormous patience in trying to mediate the conflict between opposing sides in a dispute, and trying above all, not just to make Mr. Falter safe, but trying to avoid any sort of punch up in the street that could so easily end up with really serious injuries. It's rather similar to keeping hostile football fans apart. We've seen it all too often where a punch-up can degenerate into somebody falling over, cracking their head on a curbstone and suffering from very serious injuries. Now, had that happened, I think there would have been calls for why didn't the Met prevent disorder? I think this sergeant did a very good job, and I'm very, very pleased and proud to see that the Commissioner has endorsed that and has congratulated the officer.
Well, the Met have apologised and promised to ensure greater cultural sensitivity in future communications. This refers to the fact that the police officer in that video referred to Mr. Falter, said that he was openly Jewish, presumably meaning that he was wearing a kippah skull cap. The wording was wrong, but what you're saying was the intent was right.
The intent was right. It was absolutely doing his duty. It was unfortunate that it was pretty obvious from your video that Mr. Falter was absolutely intent on making his political point, on getting through to the demonstrators and creating some sort of incident. And he was prevented from doing that, and thereby disorder was prevented. That's what the police service are there for, to mediate that sort of conflict.
Well, Gideon Falter said he was, well, in reaction to that, he said, I was Jewish, I was trying to cross the street. His point being that, you know, there's a pro-Palestinian march taking place in London. He says he wasn't there to create a flashpoint, to make a political point, to cause any kind of trouble. He simply wanted to cross the street. and he wasn't allowed to. And he took offence to that because obviously it's a pro-Palestinian march. Here's a Jewish man. His point being, you know, Jewish people don't feel safe on the streets, don't feel safe to cross the streets when these marches are happening.
Yes, and it's unfortunate, but we have to remember that we don't all have the right, the absolute inalienable right, to go where we want to and to do what we want to. If what we want to do perfectly lawfully is likely to cause a breach of the peace, risks disorder, then the police have not only the power to prevent that legally, but the duty to prevent it.
Would the police have stopped anyone from crossing that road? I mean, such was the scale of the march, hundreds of people walking past, obviously police lining the streets to make sure it's orderly and it goes in the right direction. We saw that. But would the police have stopped anyone else from crossing the road at that point?
They might well have stopped anybody else if they thought that a person crossing would have caused a problem, would have caused disorder.
But if
we've only got to think.
Turned up and said, we actually want to cross that road regardless of the march taking place, we would have been allowed to do that, do you think?
I can't judge. I wasn't there at the time. But if it was assessed as being possible for that to happen safely, not only safely for you, but safe, not causing disorder, then yes, you probably would have been allowed to. In exactly the same way as in a situation where you have opposing football crowds, somebody wearing a scarf and hat in a team's colours might not be allowed to go somewhere, whereas an old age pensioner who is obviously nothing to do with the football fans might well be allowed to cross police lines.
I want to put this to you. Gideon Falter didn't make this point at the time. He subsequently made it, and we've heard a lot of this here on Sky News when discussing pro-Palestinian marches, that the Jewish community, the areas where these marches take place, they're being seen as dangerous places to go by Jewish people when these marches are happening. Do you recognise that? Is that something that you know, it's hard to talk about other people's experiences, but I think that's the wider point that Mr. Falter's trying to make. Where these marches take place, Jewish people just don't feel safe, and they should be made to feel safe.
And it's a perfectly valid point that he's trying to make. It's the way that he's making it that I would argue with. Yes, it's very unfortunate that situation has arisen, but we quite often get in the centre of London demonstrations which make a particular section of the community or a minority feel unsafe to go there. That is why public order policing exists. People have
it clearly is an issue,
opinion.
isn't it? Because the Jewish community are voicing their concerns and they say they feel scared, and you know you have to take that on board. You have to take that at face value. The Met, the Prime Minister himself has said, needs to rebuild confidence and trust with the Jewish community. How big an issue is there, do you think, between the Metropolitan Police and the Jewish community in London?
I think with the majority of the Jewish communities in London, I don't think there is a problem at all. I think this issue has been blown up because, unfortunately, people have reacted to the initially broadcast video, which showed a few seconds in isolation from the context. It's very important that politicians wait to learn the facts and the context of some of these videos, particularly at a time when confidence in the police nationally as well as in London is at a very low ebb. I mean, we do have a problem there. Politicians can either contribute to solving that problem or they can make it worse. And I think this is a good example where a few senior politicians have actually given a knee-jerk reaction without knowing the facts. And that's very unfortunate indeed, very unhelpful.
OK, Stephen Roberts, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police. Really appreciate your time this evening on the UK Tonight. Thank you.
Good evening.
As still to come on the UK Tonight, we'll have all the latest on the parliamentary ping-pong that's ongoing in Westminster, with the Lords set to vote on the Rwanda bill within the next few minutes. Also ahead, more VAR drama has embroiled the Premier League. We'll be speaking to a former referee about how difficult it is for officials. And fancy a Swift one? We'll speak to the London pub swarmed by Taylor Swift fans after a name check on her new album.
target towns like Grimsby and Cleethorpes will help decide who wins the next election. But here, like in so many towns, some people are indifferent about polling day. Join me, Sophy Ridge, for a Politics Hub special, when we meet those who say they don't want to vote. What will change their minds? And yours.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake, might all be finished, I don't know.
Let's get a bit more now on the Rwanda bill, which is currently being debated in the House of Lords as we speak. I'm joined now by the UK's first independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, John Vine. John, it's a long, drawn-out process for Rishi Sunak to get his bill through, but he says by hook or by crook, this bill will be passed tonight.
Yeah, well, the whole thing's been a long, drawn-out process. And I think it was first announced in 2022. And I think part of the issue is that, of course, the whole idea of the bill is that it acts as a deterrent to people travelling to the UK illegally. But, of course, deterrents work best when the consequences flow quite quickly after the action. So, of course, we've been speculating for a long time about the effect of the Act once it comes into force. But at long last, we'll be able to know whether it works or not.
Those seeking to come here to the UK illegally on small boats, have they heard of the Rwanda bill?
No, I don't think many people have, actually. I think the niceties of what happens in Westminster passes by many people in the UK, let alone the people who are likely to be handing over their life savings to organised crime to try and come to the UK illegally. So I'm not entirely sure whether, and that's part of the issue around deterrence. Again, if these people really don't know about the issue, then of course it's not going to act as a deterrent. So I think they will know about it fairly soon.